I was standing at the edge of my cabin's lake with my fishing rod when I heard tires crunching on the gravel road behind me, and before I even turned around, I felt that unmistakable prickle on the back of my neck that tells you something bad is about to happen. The air was cold enough that my breath fogged, but my hands were steady as I reeled the line back in slowly, trying to enjoy the calm before whatever storm was coming my way. Then I heard a woman's voice, sharp, shrill, slicing through the stillness like a siren, and my stomach tightened instantly because I already knew the tone meant trouble. She yelled, "Hey you can't do that here." And the birds in the nearby trees scattered as if even they wanted nothing to do with her energy. I turned around and saw her, short blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a neon jogging jacket that somehow managed to be louder than her voice. I didn't know her name yet, but everything about her screamed Karen. She marched toward me like she owned the entire forest, each step landing harder than it needed to, like she wanted to shake the earth just to prove a point. She stopped only a few feet from me and planted her hands on her hips, breathing hard like she had sprinted here just to pick a fight. The lake reflected the bright sky behind her, making her silhouette even more dramatic as she pointed at my rod like it was a weapon. "This is private property," she barked, leaning forward so aggressively she almost stepped into my tackle box. I calmly set my rod down, not wanting to escalate anything, but her face twisted as if my calmness offended her. "Ma'am, this is my cabin," I said, keeping my voice even, but she instantly shook her head like she didn't believe a single word I spoke. "No, it's not," she snapped. "I know the owner's here, and you don't belong on this land." I blinked slowly, trying to process the confidence with which she lied to my face. She stood taller, puffing her chest, acting as if she was the elected sheriff of the woods, and I was some intruder she had caught red-handed. A gust of wind swept across the lake, rustling the leaves, lifting the edges of her jacket, but she didn't flinch as she jabbed her finger toward my cabin porch. "I'm calling the cops," she said, her voice suddenly gleeful in that petty way people get when they think they've found power. I raised an eyebrow, confused, because nothing about this situation warranted police involvement, and yet she already had her phone out, tapping furiously. The screen reflected in her sunglasses as she walked in circles like she was patrolling the area, narrating loudly for anyone who might be listening. "Yes, officer, there's a man trespassing and possibly poaching," she said, casting glances at me like she wanted me to react. I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me as she exaggerated every detail, practically begging for drama. She ended the call and smirked like she had just won a battle I never agreed to fight. I stood there silently, letting the wind and the water swallow the tension while she stared at me with that self-righteous expression people get when they think they've caught someone doing something wrong. It was surreal to watch her pace near my own porch, muttering under her breath as if rehearsing her victim's speech for when the officers arrived. In the distance, I could hear the faint hum of a boat engine from the far side of the lake, something that normally relaxed me, but right now it only added to the tight knot forming in my chest. She kept glancing at her watch, sighing loudly, clearly annoyed the police weren't teleporting directly to her side. She kicked at a pebble, folded her arms tightly across her chest, and kept whispering, "He's not getting away with this," as if she was preparing for some epic showdown. I simply leaned against the wooden railing, watching her through half-lidded eyes, wondering how someone could be so confidently wrong. She pulled out her phone again, snapping pictures of my cabin, my truck, even my fishing gear as if she was building a case file. The sound of each click echoed across the quiet lake, and every time she took another picture, she nodded proudly like she was gathering evidence against some notorious criminal. When she aimed the phone directly at my face, I raised a hand slightly and said, "You don't have permission to photograph me," but she scoffed like rules were mere suggestions for people who weren't her. "I'm documenting," she said, raising her chin. "This will all be important when the officers arrive." I exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to laugh at how seriously she took her imaginary authority. Her phone beeped, and she muttered, "Finally," her head snapping toward the road as if she could already hear sirens approaching. The gravel cracked under tires as a patrol SUV rolled into view, and Karen instantly straightened like a soldier awaiting inspection, waving her arms dramatically as if the officers would somehow miss her otherwise. She kept pointing at me from across the yard, mouthing accusations before the officer even stepped out of the vehicle. The door opened, and Officer Daniels emerged, tall, calm, and already wearing that exhausted look cops get when they realize someone dragged them into nonsense. Karen rushed toward him, nearly tripping over her own feet, shouting, "That's him. That's the trespasser," while jabbing her finger in my direction like she was identifying a fugitive. I stayed where I was, my hands resting casually on the railing, not because I needed to, but because I knew the truth would land soon enough. The officer glanced between us, his brows knitting in confusion as he took in the scene. Karen immediately launched into a frantic monologue, talking so fast her words tangled together. He was fishing illegally. He's staying in that cabin without permission. He's been scaring the wildlife, she said, flinging her arms around like she was reenacting a violent crime. Officer Daniels raised a hand to slow her down, but she only grew louder, her voice cracking with the thrill of self-righteousness. I told him to leave, and he refused, she cried, adding a dramatic gasp at the end. I could see the officer struggling to keep a neutral expression, especially when she leaned toward him and whispered, "Honestly, he looks suspicious." Her eyes flicked to me, narrowing like she expected me to break down under her shaky accusations. The breeze carried her perfume across the clearing, mixing with the scent of pine and lake water, an odd combination that made the moment even stranger. The officer finally turned to me and said, "Sir, can I speak with you?" in a tone that sounded more apologetic than authoritative. I walked toward him slowly, giving Karen a wide berth, though she still tried to insert herself into the conversation by hovering behind him like a gnat. "Ma'am, please step back," he instructed calmly, but she pretended not to hear him, leaning in just enough to show she felt entitled to be part of every word spoken. I handed the officer my ID before he even asked, and he glanced at it briefly before his eyes flicked up in mild surprise. "This your cabin?" he asked. I nodded. He looked at the structure behind me, then back at my ID, then at Karen, who was shaking her head violently. No, that's impossible," she said, laughing nervously. "I know everyone who owns property here." Her confidence cracked slightly, but she pushed forward anyway, clinging to her belief like it was a life raft. The tension thickened in the air as the officer stepped aside to radio something in, though I already knew what he'd find. Karen paced behind him, muttering, "He's lying. ID could be fake. Something's off," as though saying it aloud would make it true. I watched her, fascinated by how determined she was to rewrite reality. She finally stopped pacing and glared at me, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "Why are you even here?" she demanded, her voice dripping with contempt. I tilted my head, refusing to give her the satisfaction of reacting with anger. "Fishing," I said simply, which only infuriated her more. She stomped her foot like a child denied candy, her face turning a deeper shade of red with every breath she sucked through clenched teeth. Suddenly, we heard the crunch of another vehicle approaching, heavier this time, the kind of engine rumble that signaled someone with authority, or muscle, was arriving. Karen perked up instantly, convinced reinforcements for her delusion had come to back her up. She smoothed her jacket, lifted her chin, and flashed a smug smile as the black SUV rolled to a stop behind the patrol car. When the driver stepped out, her expression froze mid-smirk. It wasn't another patrol officer. It was Lieutenant Mercer. His uniform was crisp, his posture commanding, and his eyes landed on me with immediate recognition. Karen looked between us, confused, her smirk faltering as the lieutenant approached with a purposeful stride. The air shifted, carrying a new weight that even she couldn't ignore. Lieutenant Mercer extended his hand to me with a firm nod, ignoring Karen entirely as she stood there blinking like she had just witnessed a scene she wasn't prepared for. "Good to see you again," he said, his voice steady, and Karen's jaw dropped so hard I thought it might actually hit the dirt. I shook his hand, feeling that familiar grounded reassurance he carried everywhere, and for the first time since this mess began, I watched Karen's confidence crumble in real time. Wait, you two know each other? She stuttered, her voice suddenly small, as if someone had turned her volume dial down. The lieutenant didn't even look at her. Instead, he addressed Officer Daniels. This man is not trespassing. He leases this cabin and surrounding land to the state police for tactical training and night ops exercises. Karen's face drained of color, her sunglasses slipping crooked as she processed the twist. The wind rustled through the trees as Mercer continued speaking, his tone cool but firm. We have active agreements on file, access rights, and authority to utilize the property for state operations. Karen shook her head slowly, unable to accept the reality unraveling in front of her. She pointed at me weakly and whispered, but he was fishing. Mercer turned his gaze toward her, expression flat, on his own land. He said, which you trespassed onto while making a false report? Her mouth opened and closed, no words forming, her arrogance evaporating like mist under sunlight. She looked around desperately, as if hoping someone would jump out of the bushes and confirm her delusion, but the only witnesses were the officers and the quiet lake reflecting her humiliation. The distant call of a loon echoed over the water, punctuating the silence like nature itself was judging her. Officer Daniels stepped forward gently but firmly. Ma'am, I instructed you earlier to step back. You ignored that. You also made a false police report about criminal activity on private property. Karen's throat bobbed as she swallowed, her eyes darting toward her car as if calculating an escape route. I didn't know, she sputtered, I thought. He didn't seem, but every excuse sounded weaker than the last. Mercer crossed his arms, not unkind but unimpressed. Ma'am, you can't assume ownership based on your personal belief, and you certainly can't call emergency services because you don't like someone fishing. Her shoulders slumped as Officer Daniels asked for her ID. She hesitated, then handed it over with trembling fingers. The paper rustled loudly in the quiet space, and even the breeze seemed to pause, waiting. Daniels walked her through a citation for misuse of emergency services, his voice patient but firm, while she nodded miserably, no longer the self-appointed sheriff of the woods. She kept glancing at me, maybe hoping for sympathy, but all I offered was a neutral expression because I wasn't going to comfort someone who spent the morning trying to weaponize authority against me. When he finished, Daniels handed back her ID, and Karen looked at the ground, whispering, I just wanted to keep the area safe. The irony hung in the air like thick fog, impossible to ignore. Mercer finally gave her a short nod toward her car. Ma'am, you're free to go. She scurried away, climbing into her SUV without another word, her tires spinning up bits of gravel as she fled down the winding road. As the dust settled, Mercer let out a long breath and shook his head with a half laugh. Every time we use this place, there's always one, he said, and Daniels chuckled softly. I picked up my fishing rod, feeling the tension finally unclench from my shoulders. The lake shimmered calmly again, the ripples smoothing out as if reclaiming the peace she had disrupted. Mercer clapped a hand on my shoulder before heading back to his SUV, reminding me of the next scheduled training night. Daniels gave me a small salute before following. When the engines faded, I stood alone again at the water's edge, listening to the soft lapping against the shore and letting the calmness settle into my bones. The world felt balanced again, the forest breathing slow and steady around me.